The Fat Shark Scout HD came out in August 2021, and we really haven't heard too much about it since then. But these are really pretty unique goggles because right now they're the only goggles you can buy that have an integrated HDZero receiver. The question is, how does the Scout HD stack up against a standard goggle setup with the standalone SharkBite receiver? And maybe more importantly, are these goggles the right choice for you to fly with HDZero? We're going to try and answer those questions in this video. Let's start with a quick feature overview. The Scout HD is a box-style goggle with a single 1920 by 1080 LCD display. It offers a 44-degree field of view and has a faceplate design that's large enough to accommodate standard eyeglasses. The micro SD card slot for DVR footage and firmware upgrades is also located on this faceplate. The Scout HD features the same antenna configuration as the standalone SharkBite receiver with 2 internal patch antennas and 2 SMA connectors on top for additional antennas. The goggles include 3 buttons for navigating menus and have an HDZero firmware update port as well as a standard barrel jack power connector. Notably missing from these specs is any sort of analog input and any video output capability besides the DVR. If you buy these goggles, you're only going to be able to use them with HDZero and you won't be able to output the signal to an external monitor. And of course, there's no power button. Speaking of power, the goggles do include an XT60 to barrel jack cable that's rated for use up to 4S. One thing I found disappointing is that the head strap doesn't have the normal elastic loop to hold a 2S 18650 pack. That's typically how I power my goggles, so I had to 3D print a TPU holder to secure the battery pack onto the strap. I prefer the solution because it makes the goggle setup compact and self-contained, but I'm not sure that I'd actually recommend this approach for you. The Scout HD has a low battery warning that triggers at 7.4 volts, and that warning shows up as a bright yellow rectangle that does appear in DVR recordings and can't be disabled. Although it's nice to get a warning, I find that I can fly for quite a while below 7.4 volts, so I found myself wishing I could disable it. In terms of what it's like to use the Scout HD, I found myself really appreciating the integrated receiver. These goggles are approximately the same physical size as the O4X with the standalone SharkBite receiver, but they're much lighter weight and they don't have that extra HDMI cable or extra power cable that's required for the O4X. The fact that these are box goggles is certainly something that you'll either love or hate, but I know some people can't use the binocular style of goggles at all, and if you wear glasses, box goggles can be nice for that reason as well. I found these to be comfortable to wear, they fit on my face well, and really they felt pretty similar to other box goggles I've worn. The 44-degree field of view of the screen feels very reasonable. It's large enough to feel immersive, but not so large that I can't see the edges. The 1080p screen in these goggles is higher resolution than any other current FPV goggle, but I have to say that I didn't really notice any improved quality in the video. That might change if HDZero supports 1080p in the future, but for now, I don't think that's a big selling point. The biggest issue with the display on the Scout HD is that it just isn't very bright, and there are no image settings to adjust the characteristics of that display. I found it to be comparable in brightness to similar box goggles such as the SkyZone Cobra X, but compared to an OLED binocular goggle like the SkyZone Sky O4X, the display on these goggles is much dimmer. This was a noticeable difference, and I did find it a little bit harder to see in lower light conditions with these goggles, but I don't think it's a deal breaker. After flying for a few times with the goggles, I found myself getting used to the dimmer screen, and I still had a good time flying with them and enjoyed the image quality of HDZero through these goggles. Another characteristic of the display is that its design will cause a bit of a double image in the menus. These goggles use a folded optics design which involves a mirror, and as a result of how that system works, you'll see a bit of ghosting in the menu text. I wasn't expecting this, but to be very clear, it doesn't show up at all in the image that you see during flight. I only saw this in the menus, so it wasn't a real impact to my enjoyment of the goggles. Moving on to the HDZero aspect of these goggles, the video receiver and menus in the Scout HD seem to be nearly identical to the separate SharkBite receiver. The menus offer many of the same options, with only a few omitted that don't make sense on an integrated goggle. The 3 buttons on the top allow you to control the menu in the same way as the 3-way joystick button on the receiver, but I have to say that I greatly prefer these buttons over the joystick. I found the video signal in DVR to be indistinguishable from the standalone receiver, so if you're flying with these goggles, you're going to get the exact same experience as you would with any other goggle on HDZero. So that brings us back to the question of whether you should buy the Scout HD, and here's what I think. First, if you're a new user just looking to get started with HDZero and you don't already have high-end goggles with an HDMI input, I think this is an option you should consider. It's going to get you going for a very reasonable price, and I found it to be a good flying experience. Now you've got to keep in mind, these goggles only work with HDZero, so you can't use them with analog or DJI, but you also have to remember that these goggles cost the same as just the standalone SharkBite receiver, so you're getting a really good value, and as I said, I did really enjoy flying with these goggles. I also think that even if you decide to upgrade later, you'd still find these goggles useful. And that's a great segue into the other use case I can see for the Scout HD, which is to buy them as a spare set of goggles for spectators or bench use. I often find box goggles to be better for spectators. They're really easy to just pick up and look into. You don't have to adjust the focus or the IPD. And this setup's affordable enough that it's reasonable to buy it if you're often in situations where other people want to watch you fly. For similar reasons, I use mine on the bench when I'm working on a build. It's really great for just quickly checking the OSD, and I also use these for firmware updates. I appreciate that I can just have them right there and I don't have to worry about running down the battery on my main set of goggles. On the other hand, if you currently do have a high-end goggle setup with HDZero and you're looking at the Scout HD as an alternative, I'd probably encourage you to keep the setup you already have. I really felt like the screen brightness and lack of image settings on the Scout HD were a downside. I found my Skyo 4X to be a nicer flying experience, and I didn't feel like the integrated receiver on the Scout HD was enough to overcome those disadvantages. It's also worth pointing out that it's currently unclear what the future outlook for the Scout HD is. Fat Shark released these goggles back in August of 2021, but since then they've mostly pulled out of SharkBite and handed over the reins to HDZero, so I think it's unclear whether these goggles will continue to be produced in the future. So take that as you will. I am confident that HDZero is going to continue to support the goggles with firmware updates, so I'm not worried about the current ones continuing to work with the system, but I just don't know if Fat Shark's going to keep producing them, and I don't know what warranty support would look like. I think if you do want to buy these goggles, you should probably act soon because we just don't really know what's going to happen. So I hope that helps you make a decision about the Scout HD. If you do want to buy these goggles, I've got a link down in the description below, so definitely check that out. And as always, if you guys enjoyed this video, I'd encourage you to make sure you're subscribed to the channel and leave me a comment below with any thoughts or questions you have on this video or on these goggles. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.